Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, sure thing.
Excuse me. Okay, let's get it rolling. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us today, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to feature two rising superstars from LA, from different parts of the music industry, but with something in common. Both are music moguls in development, and I promise you will leave today a lot smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in all areas of the music industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the speakers themselves. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brewworks, Project Music, and Cushmasters. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Corey McGuire. Corey is the co-founder of Local Los Angeles. Alongside his partner, Jake Matthews, and a world-class team of hospitality veterans, they're building a portfolio of brands that emphasize live music in West LA. Their current brands include the Waterfront and Winston House, with more projects in development. Corey also sits on the board of Abbott Kinney Festival, a 35-year-old street fair in Venice with 125,000 attendees annually. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the cool projects he's involved with. Welcome, Corey. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
And for today's featured guest, I'm thrilled to welcome Kristin Graziani. Kristin serves as president of STEM Distribution. She leads the team that manages STEM's platform relationships with companies such as Spotify, Apple, Google, and others, and is face-to-face with musicians and labels that use STEM, which include Poolside, Taylor Gang, Brent Faiyaz, and more. Since joining STEM in 2017, Kristin has proven to be instrumental to the company's success and growth. Among a series of innovations, she's envisioned and introduced STEM Direct, which assigns an in-house artist relations member to each client in order to pitch playlist placements, review data, present marketing initiatives, and maximize visibility on streaming services. Along the way, she's also facilitated RIAA Platinum and Gold certifications for over a dozen releases across multiple genres, from hip hop to country to electronic. She recently implemented STEM Scale, a funding alternative to creators at every stage of their careers. STEM Scale allows artists on the STEM platform to access capital 78% cheaper than major labels do to invest in themselves. Prior to STEM, her career spanned roles at innovative tech platforms such as Hired Inc. and Jure. Welcome, Kristin. Please take it away, Corey.
Right on. Thanks again for having us. Nice to meet everyone. Kristin and I are really, really old friends. Actually, one of my oldest friends in LA, and I think I'm the same to her. The original Winston House was a loft just off Abbott Kinney, and I was living there, and it kind of organically turned into Winston House over time. But next door to us was the Hired office, and Kristin was working at Hired at the time, and not really in music at all. So we kind of met accidentally in a way, just because we were neighbors, and this can be a lot of fun because, like I said, we're very close friends, but there's been enough years that have passed now where I can barely remember what happened back then. Yeah. Let's start at the beginning. Obviously, we were neighbors on Electric Avenue.
Yep.
I was doing Winston House. You were at Hired at the time. What was your background and what were you doing at Hired, just to give everyone some context?
So Hired.com is a business in the talent acquisition space. And the model was to serve companies like Facebook and Amazon with providing them curated talent. And I actually entered the talent acquisition space by way of just the venture-backed startup scene in New York. So to kind of back it up, I got my start on the East Coast. I'm from Philadelphia originally, went to school at NYU, and met some great tech leaders during my studies there, and started working for a business called Jor. Jor is a business. It's a B2B business that aligns or helps transact a payment layer rather for brands and retailers. And that's what ultimately brought me to LA. I launched the hire.com office. Actually looks like very similar to what the background is here, a Venice loft, and Corey was the neighbor. And I think we were just like walking back and forth. I ended up at the place. You had like live music going on and during the evenings, but it wasn't formalized. And I remember, I think one of our first conversations was around the business you started at the time called Rally Song, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's wild. We met that early.
Yeah.
I really got into music via Winston House. Before that, in college, I had a project called Rally Song, and the whole idea was organizing college students around nonprofits through music. And that was kind of my first effort coming from Seattle to LA to try to get into music myself. And it was kind of always my plan to start something and be involved in music. But when did you make the pivot from working in tech and being outside of music to being in STEM? And what was that process like?
So it was 6 years ago that I joined STEM. The business launched, I think 7.5 years ago, I want to say. And ironically, they were a client of someone on my team at Hired. And I remember the founder, Milana, basically sharing the story of what she was trying to do for the industry, which was allow people to get paid faster, artists specifically, and get them paid in a way that makes sense. And it was a super small startup, but the way she painted the vision and what she was trying to do for the industry was really compelling. So we stayed in touch for, call it the next 18 months while I was at Hired. And I remember talking to Corey about the business, and he said, actually, a few of my friends are invested. Why don't you talk to them to see what's kind of going on there under the hood, see if it's compelling. So he introduced me to one of my now best friends, Amanda Groves, who is an investor in STEM, and Matt Graham.
I introduced you all?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's cool.
You introduced us. And Matt Graham, who was at the time had with a management company and now has launched Range Management. And the two of them were my references for Milana, and they sung her praises. They both obviously invested in the business, and they also painted kind of the similar vision of helping artists transact faster. And over time, they courted me, and I joined Milana 5.5 years ago.
So there's a lot of interesting change happening in the music industry in general, obviously, massive change. And STEM has like a really unique role in all that. Obviously, it started off with better payments, and the business has evolved into so many other things. Maybe tell us about that first from your position in the company. Like what kind of change you were evolving the company towards once you got involved, and the opportunity you saw, and maybe connect that up to what's happening in the industry at large.
Yep. So when we think about the difficulty of getting artists paid, that was the first and initial problem we were trying to solve. So we were the first distributor to bring splits to market, just like the basic ability to split revenue from either a DSP or a social platform or a platform like YouTube, because there's no way to do it. If you were collaborating on even like a YouTube video, how would you get payments into the hands of multiple people? It was incredibly manual. So that was the first thing that we brought to market. Now we're very happy to say that a lot of distributors have kind of followed the path there and have built similar products. And one of the kind of big things that we're seeing now is the need to take that a lot further. So like splits itself isn't enough, but what we want to do today is provide a really robust royalty calculation engine with a visualization layer that can work for major labels, major label distributed businesses, other labels, their sub labels, artists, their downstream shareholders, and then ensure all of those parties are getting paid in a timely way and in a way that's clear. So that's kind of the problem that still very much exists. There's not a singular company that has done that. It's a huge white space, and what we're focused on kind of solving for.
There was a moment, because I remember there was a big transition moment for STEM where you went from working with a much larger pool of smaller artists and becoming more curated. And I think the introduction of the STEM fund, what's that called?
That's STEM Scale.
STEM Scale.
Advances.
I think, kind of was coming to life around the same time. What are your thoughts on like kind of like the long tail of music right now? I think over the last 10 years, nonstop, there's just been this conversation about, just like kind of that long tail artist, that smaller artist and the business model around them. And I know that was a big part of why STEM started and is still part of it. But yeah, like what's your view and kind of the company's view on like the economics for that artist now?
So the long tail is real. It's going to continue to grow. And there are companies that are serving those type of artists. When we first launched Splits, it was basically open to anyone. Like as long as you were had a real name and you were an artist, you could be a bedroom artist, you could use that product. But the problem was for us, we were taking a percentage. So the monetization model didn't map the value that we were driving, because when you're serving the long tail, it's really hard to actually structure proper services and really like super serve the people that you need. So what we decided to do is say, there are other companies out there like TuneCore and DistroKid that do that well. They charge the flat fee and they are better positioned to serve those people over a longer period of time. So we decided to move 80% of our artists off the platform that we kind of deemed the long tail. We took a really close look at the artists that we thought we could serve best. It was around the type of music. It was around what their team structure looked like, the infrastructure of their team. And if we thought that we could actually secure them the playlist looks that they all wanted. And for the ones that it was a big moment for us because it was risky. And it was something that it took months of like trying to execute and implement on. So we moved them off the platform in May of 2019. And to me, that kind of like marks the real start of STEM, because before that, we were really just a reactive technology platform that was providing that like one value, which was Splits, and we weren't hands-on with the artists. So after we were able to move those artists off, we kind of launched the initial servicing layer that we had. And it was pretty rudimentary. It was just simply mapping all of the artists to an artist relations rep who are there to do things like change metadata, give them the reporting needs that they have, talk through upcoming release dates, and like just like honestly get on the phone like humans and like start to understand their business. And that was like step one of the servicing offering, and making sure that there was really just like proper capacity for those reps so that they weren't dealing with hundreds of people. They were dealing with like a really curated book of business. But step two was to take it a little bit further. We know that artists need some form of funding. And I think it's the job of a distributor like ours that is taking a percentage to be the type of entity that is cutting the checks, call it. So scale came into play after we moved the artists into off the platform. We launched Scale in January of 2020. And it was our mechanism for advancing. It's more calculated than some of the ways other distributors advance. And because of that, there's less risk involved for us in terms of how long it'll take to pay back. And the actual money that we are providing the artists is a lot cheaper than what they're getting from major labels or major label distributed artists, distributors. So that was kind of step two for us in January of 2020.
So when I heard about all those changes, to me, it felt like this is, looking and feeling more like a label competitor, which it is obviously in a variety of ways. But I think a big part of the business has been working directly with labels and directly with management groups as a partner to them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
So I would say the lion's share of our business, it's either a label entity that have seasoned executives that know how to market their artists really well, or it's managers who have done it before. Like very infrequently are we working with an artist directly. There's a proper team kind of surrounding them.
Mm-hmm. And because it feels like this is a space where I feel like there's new companies popping up all the time. There's a lot of new competition, more funds, obviously large acquisitions of catalog. How has STEM continued to be differentiated as there's just been like more and more people entering into the space?
So it's really crowded. It's really hard to be like fully differentiated. And the reason why I think it is because an artist is choosing a distributor for not just one reason. It's not just about like who's giving you the biggest check. It's about there's all these different dimensions by which an artist evaluates. And I think they're like force ranked differently depending on their needs. So like an example is some people are prioritizing the ability to get on playlists. Others are prioritizing a big check, or some are prioritizing a cheap check. Some care about the data analytics more than others. Some care about our strategic support more than others, which I can talk about a little later. So there's like all of these different like check boxes and different ways in which they're evaluating them. So it's hard to say like one thing alone differentiates STEM, although of course we want it to be our ability to provide financial tools. Like we're honest with ourselves that matters for some entities, but not for all. And I actually think like the reason we're winning business today and retaining business is because of how we set up internally from a like value or from an operational standpoint. And by that, I mean like we're really disciplined in terms of all the artists we bring on. Like every week we're looking at them and saying, can we serve them? We're not trying to sign for market share like a lot of major labels are. Like that's not our mandate. We don't care to have our hands on everything. We care to work with a more curated set and go really far. So I really think it's like the attention and that we're able to give and like the discipline to not bloat the system that allows us to win and retain. And that kind of all maps to like the price we're taking. We're taking 10%. We also customize back catalog deals and take even less. And I'd like to say we're driving, 12% of value. Like we're giving more than we're taking there. And I think that's why like reputationally we're able to just continue to bring in great artists and retain them.
What's been the impact of all of this on artists? And I don't mean just of STEM, but let's look back at the last 10 years of, the DSPs all becoming massively influential, the crowded space in terms of just more options for artists.
Yep.
And I mean, the industry's changed in a million ways, but this is all kind of wrapped up in this idea of like, oh, this is all going to be really good for artists.
Yeah.
And I could see a lot of reasons why it has been and maybe why it hasn't been, but what's your view on that? What's the impact been on artists of all these changes?
I think like options and alternatives by and large are always good because it's forcing like the competition to be better than the next. Like we can't sleep on a new feature. We can't sleep on a new service. Like we have to kind of always be on the cutting edge because there's so many competitors that are moving quickly as well. And I think it results in like the artist being served more because of that. On the flip side, like if you're an artist that doesn't have a manager or someone surrounding them that can like properly vet and determine what is the right distributor, what is the right label for me, like that would be hellish because you would be like on your own trying to figure out like where the truth is. Ari's Take has done, I think, a good job of like doing a matrix on different distributors and the various features and services they have, but it's like really confusing. And you would need, someone in the driver's seat to help you make that decision and what the best option is for the artist.
Yep, that makes sense. To go back a little bit, how are the major labels reacting to all this? You can talk about more competition, more options being good for the artists. Are the major labels starting to adopt similar practices and approaches as companies like STEM, or are they doubling and tripling down what they've always done and allowed it to be different?
I think all of that, in that they're doing things like launching their own distributors that are homegrown. So Equity being an example of that, or I think it's called Level being an example of that. A lot of the actual like major labels, the proper major labels, have their own distributors that they're launching and trying to bring to market. Other examples are that, distributors like an AWOL are acquired, or the Orchard years ago have been acquired because they had significant piece of the independent space, and the major labels want that market share, and they can very easily buy that up.
Which actually leads into my next question. I've whenever there's an artist that a label is wanting to work with, obviously the way they've traditionally won that business is just offering more and more money, a bigger advance. And for a company like STEM, and I'm guessing a lot of the other distributors, you're taking a more calculated, less speculative approach to investing. So how, both when you're competing with the majors, but also when you're competing with other distributors, like where's the negotiation room? Like how does that work?
For us, unfortunately today, the negotiation room isn't in like the art itself. The music could be incredible, but there's almost only so much we can flex within our model.
Yep.
Because we're really looking at how historicals have performed, using those data points and projecting how the next album or the next few albums will perform. And we cut the check accordingly. I think, was your question on like, can we compete or should we compete?
Yeah, a little bit of both of those. And then it's like really specifically, maybe if you have examples you can share of like how do these deals get done when an artist that clearly has potential, is clearly someone that you all want, comes to the table and they've got 10 other options. What gets deals signed when you don't have as much financial leverage or negotiation room?
It's a great question. I think it comes down to if the artist and the manager have the wherewithal to go about it independently. And that's something we try to vet as soon as we get in contact with the team, because we don't want to get too far down the line, waste our time negotiating and find that like the artist all along really just wants to sign to the major label for prestige. We try to vet it out. And like the ways we vet that out are understanding like, does the artist actually have the ability to be in the creative driver's seat? Like, can they reinvent themselves from a brand perspective? And some examples would be like a Frank Ocean is like the classic example of an artist that is like fully in the creative driver's seat, very infrequently wants anyone's opinion, and knows how to keep reinventing himself sonically, but also like aesthetically and kind of all things around that. So I think he's a great example of an artist that doesn't need a major label, which has proven to be the case. So if the artist in fact like wants that major route, they want that really large check, and they care about that sort of that being like something that like independence not being a part of their identity, we're not going to win on that. If the artist cares to go about it independently because they understand that long term they're keeping more money in their pocket, they're like deeply confident in their ability to create, and the manager's really confident with the network they have, and how they could potentially support their artists throughout like the evolution of their career, then we win, because we can show them like, look how much more money is on the table for the two of you.
So there's all these like high profile examples of artists who have owned this idea of being independent. Like I'm trying to think over the last 10 years, there's the Macklemore hype, Chance the Rapper,
Marshmello,
Frank Ocean. Like there's been a bunch of examples. Like on average, where are artists' heads at? Like, because I know from my daily interactions with artists, like there are a lot of artists that still really desire to be on Interscope. There's probably a lot of reasons and why that makes sense and why that's really valuable. And but then there's also this whole idea of independence that's kind of been this like rising mindset and identity, and in your experience, like what percentage of artists even are like actually in more of that independent mindset now?
So it's hard to put a percentage to it other than what the percentages are telling us, which is, I think the stats are, it's around 45% are actually independent by an ownership standpoint of the market. And then about 35% are actually independent by like how it's distributed. So an example is like, if you're signed to the Orchard, your ownership is independent, but your distribution is with the major label. Yep. So like 35 and 45 is like the approximately what the market's telling us. But from how I look at it, there's like a few different buckets that artists can fall into. So there's some artists that they start their career and they are literally on the path to be independent till the top. And like some kind of examples of that is an artist, Baby No Money, started with us. He was in college. He was like making music and would put out like high volumes of music. And it wasn't until one song hit, La La La, he was ultimately able to sell that to a major label, make money, but stay completely independent on his back catalog on futures. Yep. And like his whole thing is like, I'm going to ride this to the top as an independent artist. Like there's no world in which I sign. And there's artists that fall into that category. Then there's artists that fall into the category of I've been with a major label, right, and I've had a horrible experience, and there's no world in which they go back. Maybe their back catalog is tied up until they die, but they're ready to put out new music and kind of build their career now going forward independently. Then we see like artists that like that's their mission from the beginning. They want to sign to the major label. They want the prestige of that. And that's what we're trying to vet out and not really touch. Yep. And then there's just like amorphous bucket where it's like they might want to be independent. It depends on like the size. It depends on if they hit like a plateau in their career and they kind of like oscillate with themselves and with us. And those are the ones that are the most painful to work with. But we try to be honest with them when we see like, oh, that's a better offer, or you might need the power of the major label to reinvent you from a branding perspective, wherever it is.
It feels like to me that there's a lot of artists in that category that they had been signed to a major label and they've completed their 4 albums or whatever the number was, or even that maybe they're not all the way through their deal, but it hasn't worked out, so they're getting out of it. It feels like there's a lot of those right now, and maybe in large part where you call it like 10 years to put out 4 albums, and 10 years ago the DSPs are not what they were now, and so it feels like there's probably a lot of artists that were caught up in deals that are completely unlike or basically just don't make sense in the world we're in now. Are there a high percentage of artists that are leaving or dropping majors right now and coming to STEM and other distributors to have a conversation? Is that a big
it's
thing?
A movement, and it's why we're like in the game. And I think it took a while for us to be like recognized as a platform that is one of those options for them when they're coming off. And maybe they are considering deals with businesses like the Orchard or ADA or InGrooves, but like we're kind of in the game there. And it is that like shift where a good manager will evaluate all the options. They'll go look at what the next major label has to offer for this person, but they'll also get other deals on the table and line up and kind of choose accordingly.
Yep.
We actually see a lot of artists, a lot of women specifically, that are in those situations that are then like really horrified to take money. Like they're too scared to take a check from anyone, even from us, because they're thinking about like what that means from a creative freedom and financial freedom standpoint. So there's a lot of work that we have to do to educate on why our model is like much less restrictive and a pretty low risk, to then get them in the mindset of like how they can potentially build creatively, but they're also in ways just like testing to see if they have it in them, because it's like less of a commitment. Our deals are structured in a way where there's just less of a commitment.
Why women in particular? What's the history there?
I mean, I'm sure there's major label, executives that had specific ideas for what should be the output from a creative standpoint. It just seems to be like, maybe it's because I'm in those conversations more, so they're more comfortable opening up and like sharing that experience. But yeah, there's like a handful recently that have come off, and instead of them taking a big advance from us right away, like for their full album or for multiple albums, they'll say like, can I take a check for like 1 or 2 songs to see if this really works? So we love to kind of provide that optionality for people.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. So at this point, STEM's starting off as a complete technology company and a technology product. And at this point, still having that and growing that product and offering a lot, but also having all these other artist related services and a larger financial vehicle. Like what's that make the team look like at this point? Like what's the breakdown of like, tech versus artist focused?
So there are 50 employees today. I think we just crossed that threshold in the past few weeks. And about half of them are on the distribution team, kind of front facing with artists and labels. The other half of those folks are actually engineers, product people, product designers. We have a finance team that's continuing to grow as we're building out some royalty services in addition to our royalty technology. But there's a nice and kind of like even split. We're going to be, with this new money, continuing to invest in distribution, but also putting a lot of resources into a technology that's not going to be tied to distribution. That's the payment layer piece, the thing that we want to achieve in, the 10-year vision, the 20-year vision.
Yep. Well, speaking of 10, 20-year vision, what are the really big problems that need to be solved in music right now? And maybe speak to them in terms of what you plan on solving over the next 10 to 20 years, but also any other interesting companies in the space or who knows, maybe a problem that you think needs to be solved and there's not a company doing it and someone here can go and figure it out.
Yeah. There's so many problems. I mean, again, the big one for us is like, why does it take so long for everyone, not just the artists, but people that work alongside of the artists, the vendors, et cetera, to get paid in the industry? Why is it so confusing to understand where those revenue streams are coming from and what the respective percentage of the person is? Like that to me is the biggest problem. And that is the problem we're solving. And we're going to solve it by way of distribution. So what that means is like, we're distributing music for artists today. We can go further with our distributed clients by ingesting revenue streams that are not associated with digital distribution, whether it's merch or touring or revenue from NFT. And then essentially what we want to do is visualize that in one place so people can understand, okay, where's the majority coming from? Who do I owe? When are these payments coming in? And then ultimately actually facilitate those payments. Trying to think of other problems that haven't been solved. What are some things that you see that haven't been solved?
I think that I look at most things through the lens of like live music and how careers are being developed that way, but also just like kind of purely from like an entertainment standpoint. And especially coming out of the pandemic, I'm seeing like the opportunities that are popping up for us and just like the eagerness that there is to go out there and play live, connect with audiences. Problem I'm seeing is just like there's been this like massive oversaturation of digital, and I think there's also like this massive oversaturation of live. Like the idea of having to go see more shows like seems exhausting to me. And I think for a lot of consumers even feel that way. And so I personally would love to see someone solve the problem of like guiding me towards the shows that I actually want to see more consistently. And I think that there are brands out there that do that, ranging from, Dice with a more curated, an app and a ticketing platform, but also like heavy curation. Like I love platforms like that. I heard the analogies once that like, we're living in a world where content is every piece of content's a drop of water in the ocean, and we need more water bottles so we can like start to consume that content in ways that actually make sense to us and kind of like, trusted, trusted brands. And I definitely see a big need for that in the live space. And I guess it's part of why festivals are so successful is because you've got a trusted name, people just show up knowing that it's going to be a great experience and all that. But, there's also festival oversaturation. And so, yeah, that's one that I'm particularly interested in seeing what kind of companies pop up.
Yeah.
There's by the way, I know we're supposed to be paying attention to questions here too. I haven't been looking closely. Tom, have we missed anything?
There's a couple in the Q&A. One of the questions from a friend of mine is actually, Kristin, do you all get involved in the sync world at all on behalf of your artists?
We have not set up a proactive sync shop. We kind of, by how we're positioned, we have companies like Netflix and other like sync houses coming to us asking for content, and we react to them and oftentimes secure them and actually don't even take any revenue or percentage on that. So both parties are pocketing everything there. But I do think it's a service that we want to stand up with the right person to lead it, because it's a service that I think could be kind of immediate ROI for the business and like value for the artist.
Excellent. And then one more is what are some of the indicators that pique STEM's interest in an artist? What are some of the things that you all look at for prior to signing one or even getting in negotiation with one?
So one is around the qualification of independent wherewithal. Do they have like the grit and commitment to it? And are they the right individual to continue to drive like the future of how they brand themselves and reinvent themselves? It's kind of like, it's hard to assess. It's not black and white, but it's something we try to understand, because we don't want to sign an artist and then lose an artist. What are other things that we look for? There's also quantitative metrics. So we have kind of an internal threshold to make sure that there's enough digital streaming revenue before we're taking them on. We're not launching artists from ground zero. Trying to think what else we look for. Commercial genres. We're in every major commercial genre. We're not doing anything too fringe. And when we take an artist on, we ask ourselves, do we have the team internally to work that? One, do we have connections with the DSPs where we can get them placed on the right playlist? And then the other is there a strategist that knows how to properly allocate the advance we just gave them? So do we have the internal know-how is important for us.
Very cool. Well, those are a couple of the questions that I had fielded. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to hear a little bit about what Corey does. And Winston House is one of the coolest concepts I've ever heard of. Can I shine the light on him for a couple minutes?
Yes. The origin story is really good.
Bring it.
Oh, yeah. So Winston House was an idea at first that didn't completely involve music. It only partially did. And the idea was just that there's a lot of young, creative people that live in Los Angeles and moved to Los Angeles. And it felt weird to me that there wasn't a place or a brand that was just identified as like, oh, this is where we go to make friends. And it's like kind of the place for us to hang out. And I'd say the closest that lived in that category was, like brands like Soho House, where, Soho House is obviously amazing and has been, leading the way for 20 plus years, maybe even 30 plus years. I don't know. But it's such a big company at this point, such a large membership base. And so I felt like there could be a lot of value in just building an actual community, a place for artists and people that were interested in the arts to come and hang out. And so I had that idea and I put together a business plan and wanted to raise money from investors to go and do that, but ran into the problem of, having no experience, being bad at putting together a business plan, and also not really knowing that many people in music. And actually, I'd say kind of knowing nobody, not having any real relationships in music. So I kind of got lucky in the sense that a family friend of mine dropped out of school up in Oregon and moved to LA to play guitar. And I had this light bulb moment of, I'm living in this big loft with a bunch of friends, and here's an artist that in a lot of ways is kind of like, I'll just call it like the target consumer for this concept I want to build. And I'm just going to let him come and sleep in this loft that I'm in and like just start by helping him. Keep it really simple. I always had a lot of like big grand ideas, but I got the advice to just like start as simple as possible. So I started just by helping out that one artist. His name's Corey Harper. And what happened was pretty amazing, because it was basically like this idea that I had in my head, I saw come to life right in front of me, but without a lot of control over it. It really felt like kind of like some magic happened. And all it was Corey was the first artist, and gradually other friends of his from up in the Pacific Northwest moved down, and more artists started coming through this loft I had on Electric Avenue in Venice. We started putting on these Thursday night shows, and before we knew it, there was hundreds of people clamoring to get into those shows, and yeah, beyond this idea of community, it started to evolve into this idea of bring live music to the West Side and live music to Venice. And it was kind of the combination of those two missions, speckled in with, some very large artists that kind of liked what we were doing and started popping in to play in my living room. And the first one, and really it was like, the big one that sparked everything for us, was Justin Bieber, who I met through Corey Harper and Cody Simpson. And Justin had started hanging out at the house, and he ended up playing one of our Thursday night showcases, posting it to Instagram, saying a lot of nice things about us. And next thing I knew, like this like little kind of semi-popular West Side thing we were doing started to get buzz beyond that, and started meeting a lot of people in the music industry. And over the next 2 years, a lot of big artists and a lot of big names came into play. But in addition to that, a lot of emerging artists that were playing their first shows were either getting signed because of us, or were having like these big breakout moments, not necessarily because of us, but kind of like right around that time. So we built this reputation as a place for the best new artists to come and play and be showcased, and it got to the point where thousands of people were trying to get into these little 150, 200 person shows where we weren't announcing who the artists were. And so that was a lot of fun and really exciting, but I was also dealing with the fact that this is all happening in my house and I had no business model around it. And I was going into debt multiple times trying to keep it going until I figured out the next step. And there's a lot of extremely helpful people along the way, and a couple left turns that didn't end up being the right fit. But long story short, I met my business partner, Jake Matthews, in late 2018. And we had this shared vision about what the West Side of Los Angeles could be. Obviously anyone that lives on the West Side, loves it, and people love to come visit over here, but there's very little to do in terms of live music, nightlife, entertainment. And so Jake had recently bought and begun developing a property called the Waterfront, which is a 10,000 square foot restaurant, beer garden, ultimately like massive party spot. 5,000 to 7,000 people come through there on the weekends, and it's often built around DJs and live bands. And we combined up what he was doing there with Winston House, and really his skill set with my skill set, and set up the company Local Los Angeles, which right now we're just 100% focused on I guess that original vision, bringing live music to the West Side of LA, but done through a live events business, done through a hospitality business, and then a creative services business. So yeah, we're working on more properties that are all music based for the West Side, and we have a few large event properties we're developing, and we are, still just very focused on the music and helping new artists, but also consistently working with massive artists and getting them to come and do things on the West Side. And as we continue to solidify ourselves in this part of town and really make a name for ourselves for being the group here, we'll take the brands that are most successful in the portfolio. And I think Winston and Waterfront it's very clear that both of them will have legs to move outside of Venice too. So, we'll end up opening Winston houses in Austin, Nashville, New York, London, Toronto, any market where there's a music industry and kind of like the need for the unique role we play in that scene. And the Waterfront, anywhere with like a big beach or a lake, we'll continue to build these locations that are aspirational for young people to come and meet friends and see live music. The last piece in all of this, I would say, is what you mentioned at the beginning. I sit on the board and produce Abbot Kinney Festival, which is a 35-year-old community event here on the West Side, 125,000 people in one day. I guess that makes it the largest event on the West Side of LA. And it's just an amazing event, a chance for the whole West Side community to come together and hang out. And it's exciting to me because there's just so many ways for it to grow and for the business model to be better. And so we've got a lot of grand plans for that as well.
And now what I'll say in the music space, getting an artist to perform at Winston is very much like a stamp of approval and validation, which is really cool to see.
Oh yeah. So where was Bieber in his arc when he appeared there?
Yeah, it was actually a really great moment for Bieber, and by default us, because he was just putting out the Purpose album, and which looking back, I view as like really this moment that like solidified Justin as like the amazing artist he always was. You know, he was just viewed as, you know, a celebrity or teeny bopper, and there's truth to both those things, but at the heart of it, you know, he's an amazingly talented singer and a superstar. And that jump from being a teenager to being, you know, a star as an adult is really hard. Obviously, a lot of artists aren't able to make that jump, and he was kind of in the middle of you know, himself and Scooter and their whole team handling that perfectly. That Purpose album had so many amazing songs on it, and that was right at the moment that he was around Winston House too. And so it brought like the major like celebrity factor and the star factor, but also he was being legitimized enough as like, you know, the true artist that he is, that it was really perfect timing for us too. And within like a year and a half of that, the big shows that happened were some emerging artist stuff, like the band Midland played their first show with us in that time while we were just getting going, and they've gone on to be a huge country act, obviously, and let's see who else. I mean, the Shins played in that first year, then yeah, that was the big one in 2018. 2017. Ed Sheeran played when he was like, you know, officially the biggest artist in the world, you know, from a numbers standpoint, and that was really the show that kind of completely solidified Winston House as a thing, even though it was just happening in my living room. And after that, there was this long run of working with a lot of big artists, but you know, not many as big as Ed and Bieber, just because there's not many that are as big as them. But yeah, to Kristin's point, we curate the music at Winston House based on music we love. We don't really care about how many tickets an artist can sell or how big their following is yet, because we have our own built-in audience. Like we can fill up shows for anyone, whether they have a ton of fans or no fans yet. So that's kind of been one of our unique things, that we program entirely off artists that I love and that my team loves. And it's allowed us to exist as this brand more than just being like a venue utility that can be like rented out or used to put on shows.
How do you do the ticketing?
We actually do very little ticketing. Most of what we do is via like guest lists, and so yeah, we use the space more as like showcases and parties and collaborations, less of release parties and less like publicly ticketed shows. And so it's just even today, a lot of the emails we'll get an email from an agent. We've got this artist, they can sell this many tickets. Like, can we do something? And it's always valuable to know that information, but we actually have a whole process we run behind the scenes of just like listening to the music as a team, getting to kind of know what's going on with that artist, and then, you know, deciding if we want to do something. We're still kind of finding a rhythm, you know, after being shut down through the pandemic, and even for, you know, half a year to a year before that, because we were transitioning into the new Winston House location. But the rhythm I like to be in is that we don't really take any requests or anything that's sent to us unless it comes through a close friend. We like to be really proactive in deciding, here's the artists we like out there, and reaching out to their teams and putting together a plan to put on a night together. And we're honestly not quite back in that mode yet. It's just been, you know, a lot of things that we're figuring out, reopening in the new space, coming out of a pandemic, and having a small team that's doing a lot of work. But that's how I like it to be run, is just yeah, just being extremely proactive and deciding like, all right, we really love this artist. Let's go and find a way to get something done with them, as opposed to sitting back and like letting inbound opportunities come.
I see some synergies between both of your businesses.
Yeah, we do some. We put on a number of showcases, and I was laughing because the profile picture that Kristin had for this talk was actually taken at Winston-Salem. So we did a STEM photo shoot there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I send artists over to Kristin. Kristin sends artists over to me, and it works out nicely.
Very nice. Kristin, there's another question for you in the chat, and that is, talk about maybe one or two of your signature successes among, artists. Is there a case study that you're particularly proud of?
There's always a lot. Let's see. I always like to talk about Baby No Money, because he started literally as a college student that had this kind of like hobby, and then was able to make a profession out of it, and has been able to retain his rights, and has created so many revenue streams for himself. And he attributes a lot of that. He's Baby No Money is what we all joke about, in so much that he now has lots of money, and he's been really smart about making sure he's pocketing the lion's share of that, like negotiating all the right rates for himself, and being really, really like, that's what I'm looking for, diligent when he's looking at deal terms. So that was a cool one to see and be a part of. And like some of his bigger moments were when we secured Times Square billboards, and billboards in Canada, where he's from, and being able to build that kind of editorial story from small artist to recognizable one. Let's see what else is. We love working with Justine Skye. She's an example of an artist that has come off a major label. And the best part about, I think, her story is that each and every time she releases with us, the music is like better and better. So you can actually watch kind of like the maturation of her sound. And I think we've done some really great work with her, introducing her to the platforms in the right way, making sure that we're kind of giving all the strategic support we can on who are the right, not she was working with a major label before where everything was bundled in one sort of service offering, but now pairing her with the right digital marketers, for instance, and giving her those like tips on what the best third-party services are. We work really closely with that team, and something we're really proud of.
Wonderful. Another one for you, Corey. When is the Abbott Kinney Festival this year?
The Abbott Kinney Festival is not going to happen this year. It's going to happen. It'll be back in September next year. It happens at the last weekend of every September, and we thought it would be back this year, but we ultimately made a decision to wait, because we felt like, even though we're coming out of the pandemic and it's all feeling really good, we don't know what's going to happen with the new variants, and we also don't know how the city of LA is going to handle that. And for a festival like Abbott Kinney, where it definitely doesn't have the amount of funding or even just like financial outcomes riding on it that like a Coachella does, or these like much larger commercialized music festivals, we just felt it was better to wait. And frankly, everyone's been so busy coming out of the pandemic that it was also nice to have the time and one less massive project on our plate. But so yeah, September next year. That being said, we've also been looking at doing a spring version of it. That I think we've got a pretty exciting angle and some really huge people that are interested in being involved in. And so there's a chance that a version of that happens this coming spring before the original Abbott Kinney Festival comes back next September.
Well, cool. We wish you luck on that one.
Thank you.
We've got just a couple minutes. I'm going to hit you both a couple of my favorite lightning round questions. First off, what was your very first concert that you went to?
It's a really good question. Thinking.
Probably someone like super emo, like for her.
Probably like Valencia, which was an East Coast band. I like a lot of the tri-state area bands we would go to in like old churches or fire halls. I'd have to imagine it was one of those.
How old were you?
Probably like 12, 13.
Yeah. Corey?
I think mine was when I was 18 and it was Coldplay. I graduated high school and I flew to LA with a friend to watch Coldplay, and people are always so shocked to hear that my first like experience with live music was so late, but it was pretty late. I wasn't growing up. My whole life was soccer, and I was in southwest Washington, and this wasn't really on my radar that much. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Coldplay when I was 18.
That's a solid one. How about the first record you purchased with your very own money?
I think the Yellow Card record. The
Yep, there it is.
Ocean Avenue one, I'm pretty sure.
It was probably, for me, it was like either like Linkin Park or Creed or Nickelback, like someone in that world. Yeah. Or, to be fair, my parents might have bought those for me, but I do remember buying Stadium Arcadium by the Chili Peppers. My mom dropped me off at Fred Meyer in Vancouver, and I ran inside and got that album. So it might have been Stadium Arcadium by the Chili Peppers.
Strong. Both answers from Corey, very strong. Kristin,
Okay.
final lightning round question. Guilty pleasure music act.
Still
Maybe
Taylor
you're not proud of it, but it's your guilty pleasure.
Taylor Swift.
It's a good one.
Still Creed.
Yeah, still
That has
Creed.
to be that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Creed and Nickelback get a lot of flack, but they're both so good.
Right. Well, excellent. Well, guys, we are out of time, and I just want to say thank you to you both for gracing us with your presence today. I knew this was going to be a cool one. You both are just absolutely so creative. You've got cool businesses that are growing like a weed, and I can't wait to watch it all happen in spades over the next few years. So keep doing what you're doing. To the audience, thank you for your continued support here. And we will see you actually in 2 weeks. We're taking next week off for Music Biz Conference. And the week after that, my daughter graduates from college. So you won't see me for 2 more weeks, but we'll be back at the end of May. Finally, be nice to each other. Get a shot if you haven't gotten one. And we'll see you out there at a live music show sometime soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks, everyone.
Guys.
Bye-bye.